understanding of and knew that it was coming because the prophet had told him this, and we see how he had it in verse 27. Okay? All right, so the time has come. Verse 26, we know the battle is at hand, just like the prophet said. And in verse 27, and the children of Israel were numbered and were all present and went against them. And the children of Israel pitched before them like two what? Two little flocks of kids, but the Syrians filled the country. So despite Ahab knowing that this battle was coming, and despite him having plenty of time, it appears that Ahab's army was what? Not. Almost as if Ahab had essentially done nothing to prepare him and his people for the battle that was to come. Israel's, as we see, army here vastly outnumbered. Verse 28. And then there came a man of God and spake unto the king of Israel and said, Thus saith the Lord, because the Syrian is God of the hills, but he is not God of the valleys. Therefore will I deliver all this great multitude into thine hand, and ye shall know that I am the Lord. So in the midst of this, again, devastatingly terrible odds for Israel's army, and partly because Ahab had done nothing to prepare, the man comes to Ahab and tells Ahab that he did not appreciate the Syrians' God as simply just the God of the hills, or a God of the hills and not of the valleys. And again, God promises Ahab that the victory would be the Israelites. And the victory would be because to defend, again, the name of the Lord, and once again to show Ahab that God is God, that He is the Lord, and that He is in control. Because obviously in the several months that had passed, Ahab had still yet to learn to look to God for help. Okay? Even though the prophet told him to do so, even though he'd seen it firsthand a couple of different, on numerous occasions now, right? Ahab has seen the power of the Lord work on numerous occasions. He saw a pillar of fire come down and completely just consume everything, right? He saw these things take place. He saw the insurmountable odds against his armies and how God allowed these armies to overtake the Syrians. He has seen miracles happen before him. And he yet still has not decided to look to God for help. So, we get to verse 29. We kind of see what happens here. And they pitched one over against the other for 7 days. And so it was that in the 7th day the battle was joined, and the children of Israel slew of the Syrians. How many does it say? 100,000 footmen in one day. So the children of Israel killed 100,000 Syrian troops in one day. Go to verse 30. But the rest fled to Aphek into the city, and there was a wall that fell upon 27,000 of the men that were left. And Ben-Hadad fled and came into the city into an inner chamber. So on the 7th day of their encampment, we know how battles work back in these times. They set up camps. They kind of both camps are off in the distance. They can see each other. They set up camp. So on the 7th day of the encampment, the battle finally begins. Ahab's troops, who nowhere near the numbers of the Syrians' troops, killed 100,000 of the Syrians in one day. And we still had a large number of those Syrians' footmen, or the soldiers, to escape. And they escaped to Aphek. And this is a town that was east of the Sea of Galilee. And the 100,000 man slaughter. Again, we saw that there was 27,000 of them. And once they got to Aphek, we see that as soon as they come into the city, in verse 30, what happened to them? the wall of the city that had probably been standing there for how long? The city had probably been there for a very long time. That wall was probably very well constructed. The moment they get into the city, the wall just collapses on 27,000 of them. And it kills the rest. And God caused that to happen. He just lost 127,000 soldiers in a matter of a very short period of time. He flees as well into the inner chamber, and he is now completely humiliated and been completely humbled by the true God of Israel. God now has given Ben-Hadad ample proof, ample instances when he has seen that he indeed reigns not just in the hills, but in the plains, that God reigns everywhere. There it is. There we see the battle. Ben-Hadad leading his troops to Aphek. And then, of course, that's where Aphek is where the walls collapsed. 100,000 of the soldiers there right outside the Sea of Galilee were killed by Ahab's troops. And then the wall collapsing down and killing the 27,000 fleeing Syrian soldiers. Okay. So the Lord now has humbled Ben-Hadad, and now he's going to turn his sights on King Ahab, who now has seen his soldiers battle that they shouldn't have won. He's seen his soldiers kill 100,000 of the Syrian armies who were better prepared, better equipped, stronger, just all around in better chances of them winning. He then noticed that as the rest of those dudes were leaving, 27,000 of them died because the wall that had been there for several years collapsed on top of them. And Ben-Hadad is crawling out of hiding here and has been humbled himself. God is beginning to set in motion this plan to humble King Ahab. Okay? Verse 31 of chapter 20. And his servants said unto him, Behold, now we have heard that the king of the house of Israel are merciful kings. Let us, I pray thee, put sackcloth on our loins and ropes upon our heads, and go out to the king of Israel. Peradventure he will save thy life. This is Ben-Hadad and his advisors talking. So verse 32, they gathered sackcloth on their loins, put ropes on their heads, and came to the king of Israel and said, Thy servant Ben-Hadad saith, I pray thee, let me live. And he said, Is he yet alive? He is my brother. Now the men did diligently to observe whether anything would come from him, and did hastily catch it. And they said, Thy brother Ben-Hadad. Then he said, Go ye, bring him. And then Ben-Hadad came forth to him, and caused him to come up into the chariot. And Ben-Hadad said unto thee, verse 34 is where I'm at, The cities which my father took from thy father I will restore, and thou shalt make the streets for thee in Damascus as my father made in Samaria. Then said Ahab, I will send thee away with this covenant. So he made a covenant with him and sent him away. All right, so Ahab now has just won this battle. Ben-Hadad has had essentially come crawling to Ahab, and his pride here that we see is even more so revealed because he makes an unwise decision, and by acting accordingly, according to his desire, to what it may cost him or anybody else. That is just bad. Of course, we know both those victories wrought by God on the nation's behalf. Ahab still could not understand and recognize the importance of obeying God in the midst of all this. Okay, he continues to make his decisions his own way without any type of counsel at all. God wanted Ben-Hadad dead. Okay, God wanted Ben-Hadad to be killed. 34 there that King Ahab is signed a peace treaty with him, essentially, right? He signed a peace treaty in some way. And this treaty that was signed between these two kings was there essentially to help stroke Ahab's ego even more. Okay? and provide the protection of Israel's border, and it gave Israel an opportunity for a faster recovery from this drought that they had been dealing with. Now, it's important for us to remember that the Lord of Israel, the Lord is Israel's self-existent. Promised that he was going to protect Israel, had already promised that he would provide for Israel, and the contingency was all they had to do was simply look to him. They did that, the Lord was going to take care of them. Ahab here, as we can see, completely misses the lesson that God is trying to teach him. Completely misses it, and does not see God as the Lord and protector of Israel. And because he misses this, Ahab allows these evil desires of his own heart to influence his. The Lord plans here a graphic object lesson to help Ahab see and the situation of who the true king is. And because of the Ahab not following it and it not happening, we kind of see some of the things that go. Look at verse 35. A certain man, the sons of the prophet, said unto the neighbor, and the word of the Lord, smite me, I pray thee. And the man refused to smite him. Then said he unto him, because thou hast not obeyed the voice of the Lord, behold, as soon as thou art departed from me, a lion shall slay thee. And as soon as he was departed from him, a lion found him and slew him. Okay, so Ahab did not do what God had wanted him to do. Okay, God commands here one of the sons of the prophet in verse 35 to request. The request is that his companion kill him down with his own weapon. See in verse 35, certain man, the sons of the prophet, said unto his neighbor in the word of the Lord, smite me, I pray thee. And the man refused to smite him. Because of this blatant rejection, right, of blatant rejection of God's word, the prophet turns to the neighbor, says, God's told you to kill me. He did not, refuse, showing Ahab this lesson. Because he refused, that this lion came and he did. This was an object lesson for after another man obeyed and wounds the son here of the prophet poses as a soldier and confesses how he's allowed Ahab to escape. Let's continue to read here. Verse 37. All right, so the first guy said no and he died because of a lion. Verse 37. Then he found another man and said, smite me, I pray thee. And that man smote him, so that in smiting he wounded him. So the prophet departed and waited for the king by the way, and disguised himself with ashes upon his face. And as the king passed by, he cried unto the king and said, Thy servant went out in the midst of the battle, and behold, a man turned aside, and brought a man unto me, and said, Keep this man. If by any means he be missing, then shall thy life be for his life, or else thou shalt pay a talent of silver. And as thy servant was busy here and there, he was gone. And the king of Israel said unto him, So shall thy judgment be, thyself hast decided it. And he hasted and took the ashes away from his face, and the king of Israel discerned him that he was of the prophets. And he said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, because thou hast let go out of thine hand a man whom I have appointed to utter destruction, therefore thy life shall go for his, and thy people for his people. And the king of Israel went to his house, heavy and displeased, and came unto Samaria. So we see the second man now wounding the prophet as God had done, obeyed and wounded the son of the prophet. And the prophet then poses as the soldier, confessed that he had allowed a captive to escape. He confesses this stuff to Ahab, and Ahab recognizes the action of him being a soldier and letting the captive escape. He recognizes that action as being capital crime and refuses to grant the soldier any type of pardon. Okay, so hearing this judgment from Ahab, the prophet then reveals that he was in a disguise, reveals himself to Ahab, and then charges Ahab with the very crime of letting Ben like God had wanted him to. And because of that act of disobedience, he tells Ahab that Ahab and his people were all going to die because of his disobedience unto. Hearing this divine sentence, hearing this message from the prophet, we see at the end of chapter 20 that Ahab becomes very heavy-hearted and displeased and returns back to Samaria and to his palace and suggests here that he was mad, he's throwing a tantrum, and he's mad at everything that's going on, and turns his back on God completely and refuses to look at him at all as Israel's Lord. Okay? So Ahab here, as we've seen now on several different instances, has essentially everything that a king desires. Okay? Ben-Hadad restored the stuff to him. The Lord had taken care of his armies. The Lord has helped him in every way. But we continue to see King Ahab be plagued by his stubbornness. Okay? Where does King Ahab's stubbornness? Why do we see him being so stubborn? For what reason? Disobedience to God, right? But where does that stubbornness come exactly? Because pride and stubbornness. Okay? So why do you think that pride and stubbornness go hand in hand? What's the reason for that? Why do pride and stubbornness go hand in hand? What will a proud person not do? Won't humble himself and admit what? Proud person won't admit that he's wrong. Okay? And a proud person who won't admit what he's wrong automatically thinks that everything that he does is right. Will stubbornly rejecting the truth avoids them being humbled. If I know that I'm right, and I'm right no matter what, no matter if you can prove to me that I'm wrong, but I still tell you that I'm right and the truth. Okay? When Christians who are proud avoid the truth that their actions are not, okay, has to, right? When God intervenes to a proud Christian who is stubborn, intervene with love and compassion, God has to intervene sometimes with kids. Sometimes punishment, right? A spanking or a grounding or whatever it is. There's some punishment instead of not asking God for God at all. The fall. Okay, so that is the lesson as we. God had even been helping him, and he still did not see where he was at fault. Okay? And because of that, God has to step in and humble him. 1 Kings, look at verse 39 of chapter 22. Go over to 1 Kings chapter 22 and go over to verse 39. Ahab here, everything he could desire, Ben-Hadad restored to him the cities of his father's lost. The nation was enjoying peace and prosperity once again. Ahab had a beautiful ivory palace here at Jezreel. Look at verse 39. Now the rest of the acts of Ahab and all that he did are not written in the book of Chronicles. Are not written of the palace. Had these gardens. And that this plot of ground that was the gardens were at, the actual ground was there and possessed by man. Back over Ahab had been offering now to buy or trade this land from Naboth for quite some time. And Naboth, diffusing was this law that God had forbade any type of transaction. So look at 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 1. And it came to pass that after these things, that Naboth, the Jezreelite, had a vineyard which was in Jezreel, hard by the palace of Ahab, the king of Samaria. And Ahab spoke unto Naboth, saying, Give me thy vineyard, that I may have it for gardens of herbs, because it is near a better vineyard than it. Said to Ahab, The Lord forbid it me, that I should give the inheritance of my fathers unto thee. Okay, so there's a law, a long-withstanding law. It's over in Numbers 30 over there. But because of that law, Naboth refuses to sell this land to Ahab. Okay, so we get to verse 4. And Ahab came into the house, heavy and displeased, because Naboth spoken unto him, I will not give thee thy inheritance of my fathers. And he laid him down upon his bed and turned away his face and would eat no bread. So the response here of Ahab in verse 4 is what? We see again, he's pouting, he's stubborn, and he's mad because he's not getting what he wants. Okay? Let's go to verse 16 of chapter 21. And it came to pass, when Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, so some time has passed, Naboth has died, and Ahab rose up to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possessions of it. So we see that Ahab, because he was mad, because he was upset, set up this idea and had this little plan. And in verses 5 through 16, we don't have time to get to all of it, but there was a plan that Ahab and Jezebel concocted. Okay? And the plan that they came up with was that they were going to have this guy killed, right? Naboth was going to be killed in a way because he had essentially told the king no. And down through verses 5 through 16, so we don't have the plan that Jezebel kind of killed. This diabolical crime that they had accomplished, and that murder, the Lord commanded from verse 17, and the Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Arise, go down and meet Ahab, king of Israel, which is in Samaria. Behold, he is in the vineyard of Naboth, whither he is gone down to possess it. So there's Ahab's ivory palace. Okay, that he's got the garden there. They devised this plan. Jezebel himself devised this plan to kill Naboth. And we have here this description of the violations of what Jezebel, the laws that she and Ahab violated in the Ten Commandments. Of course, we can see each one of those that kind of taken place. And the one act that she came up with, she violated 7 of the 10 Commandments. Right after that happens, then we see verse 25, so we can finish this up. Sends down Elijah to talk to Ahab, or to go see Ahab. He's standing in the vineyard of the man they just had killed. And there was none like unto Ahab, in verse 25, which did sell himself to work wickedness in the sight of the Lord, whom Jezebel his wife stirred up. And he did very abominably in following idols, according to all the things as did the Amorites, who the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. And it came to pass, when Ahab heard those words, that he rent his clothes, put sackcloth upon his flesh, and fasted, and lay in sackcloth, and went softly. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Seeing thou how Ahab humbled himself before me, Because he humbled himself before me, I will not bring the evil in his days, but in his son's days will I bring evil onto his house. So we get to verses 25 and 26, and it reports that there had what? Never been a man like Ahab. Okay, urged by his wife, he sold himself to do much wickedness. And the Bible likens him, we see in verses 25 through 29, likens him to the Amorites, who the Amorites, the Lord who drove out of their land because of all the abominations and the idolatries that they did. Elijah's announcement of judgment crushed Ahab, crushed him to the part where he felt completely insecure about what was going on, and the words of Elijah went essentially straight to his heart. This hardened sinner, who now we have seen do multiple just terrible, dastardly deeds, very, very evil things. The hardened sinner, we see in verse 27, rinse his clothes, puts on sackcloth, and fast and lay there in sackcloth. Ahab's pride cost him the sustenance and the safety God had offered to Israel if they humbly and obediently looked to God. But because of God and God's grace, we see that at the end of this story, as a response to Ahab finally humbling himself, right? Ahab finally sees his error of his ways. Because of that, God responds to this by postponing the judgment that he was going to give to Ahab, and is going to give it to his son Joram, which we're going to see later on. Ahab's humble display must have been at least partially sincere, because the actions would have infuriated Jezebel. Agitating Jezebel was not something Ahab would have done without a very, very good reason to do. So, last thing here. Ahab is a royal pity party that he's thrown for himself. We see Ahab as a sign of pride, because he continues to refuse to listen to the advice that's given to him. We see him ignoring God's word as well. He pouts about the circumstances, destroys whatever it takes, even as far as taking somebody else's life just to get his own way. He considered himself above everybody else. And so that's signs of pride, signs of humility, praying consistently for others, submitting to others, seeking to meet others' needs, treating others as important, and trusting God in all circumstances. So, as we take a last look here at the life of Ahab, and hopefully we see not the same. We hope we don't see the same correlations in our lives as we saw in Ahab's life. But if you see some signs of pride. Some of the things that are on the left-hand side of this, some of the things that are in Ahab, the result of the remedies of that are these signs of humility. Right? Pray more for others, treat others as being as important as always. God will always humble the proud. Remember, God will always lift up the humble. Overall statement for lesson number 5 of our Life Forever is to make sure that we are humbling ourselves before the Lord. King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, and the lessons that we can see from them. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for our lesson here that we have, and being able to look at Ahab and Jezebel and just some of the things they came up with, about how even though you had to chastise, you had to punish, you had to fix and correct and do the things you had to do. And we know that those had to happen because you have to judge the sinner, Lord. You will take care of pridefulness and stubbornness. You will take care of disobedience to you, Lord. And you will correct those things because that's who you are. That's what we can expect as Christians in our lives when we follow down those paths. But seeing Ahab and understanding what he's done, and then finally at the end of all things, see the sincerity in his confession, and how because of his sincerity, because of the seeing the error of his ways, the same God of judgment, the same God of punishment, the same God of having to deal with sin, is the exact same God of grace and of love and of compassion. But you let this old sinner who has done some pretty terrible things, and you withheld the judgment on him because of the sincerity of his following of you. So what we can see now is that both ends of this spectrum, that you have to judge it, Lord, but you also love us and you care for us and you want us to be completely and entirely obedient to you. So I pray that that's a takeaway for us, that the stubborn times that we have, the pride times that we have, we all go through, that you help us eradicate those things from our lives so that we can be just fervently obedient to you, Lord, because the blessings that come from it. Lord, Fairfax Robbie comes the next hour. Lord, just use him in a mighty way as well, and keep us attentive to the word. In your